My name is Father Michael Sullivan. I'm 75 years old, and I've spent 50 years in this confessional booth. 50 years of listening to people's deepest secrets, their greatest shames, their most painful truths. And I need to tell you something that might be hard to hear. The confessions that devastate me the most aren't about affairs or crimes or lies. They're about the quiet ways we destroy the people we love most, the ways we damage our children without even realizing it. Last week, a woman came to me. Her name was Patricia. She was 72 years old. She hadn't been to confession in over 40 years. She walked into this booth, sat down, and the first thing she said was,
"Father, I need to confess something about my children, and I'm terrified they'll never forgive me."
What she told me over the next hour made me realize something. The worst damage we do to our children isn't always obvious. It's not always abuse or neglect in the traditional sense, and sometimes it's the love we withhold, the words we never say, the impossible standards we set. And by the time we realize what we've done, our children are already broken. Patricia's story isn't unique. I've heard versions of it dozens of times. But I'm sharing it with you today because if you're a parent, or if you're planning to be one, you need to hear this. Before you make the same mistakes she did.
Father, I don't know where to begin. I'm 72 years old. I have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and none of them speak to me anymore. Well, that's not entirely true. They're polite. They send cards on my birthday. They visit on Christmas. But there's nothing there. No warmth, no real connection. They treat me like an obligation, like a stranger they have to be nice to. And Father, I deserve it, because I spent 30 years destroying them with my expectations. I didn't hit them, I didn't scream at them, I didn't abandon them, I did something worse. I made them feel like they were never good enough.
Patricia's hands were shaking as she spoke. I could hear the tremor in her voice, decades of guilt finally breaking through. I asked her, "Patricia, tell me what happened. Start from the beginning."
My oldest son, David, he's 48 now. When he was 7 years old, he brought home a drawing from school, a picture of our family. He was so proud of it. He ran up to me, held it up, his face just glowing with excitement. And you know what I said, Father? I said, "The proportions are off. Your father's head is too big. And why did you colour the sky purple? Sky is blue, David." I watched his little face fall, watched the light go out of his eyes. And then I said, "Why don't you try again? I know you can do better." He never showed me another drawing. That was the first time. But it wasn't the last. When he was in high school, he got a B+ in math. He was so happy, he'd worked so hard. I looked at his report card and said, "What happened? You usually get A's in math." He said, "Mum, B+ is still really good." And I said, "Good isn't excellent, David. I know you're capable of excellent." He stopped trying after that. His grades dropped. He became distant, and I told myself I was pushing him to be his best. I told myself I was preparing him for a competitive world. But Father, I was just teaching him that nothing he did would ever be enough.
I've heard this pattern before. Parents who think they're motivating their children by withholding approval. Parents who think love should be conditional on achievement. I asked Patricia about her other children.
My daughter, Sarah, she's 45 now. When she was 16, she came to me and said she wanted to study art in college. She was talented, Father, really talented. She had this gift for seeing beauty in everything, but I told her art wasn't practical, that she needed to study something that would guarantee a career. I told her to be a doctor or a lawyer, something respectable. She cried. She begged me. She said art was the only thing that made her happy. And I said, "Happiness doesn't pay bills, Sarah. You'll thank me later." She went to business school like I wanted. She got her degree. She got a good job. And she's been miserable for 25 years. Last year, I went to visit her apartment. She wasn't home. I was looking for a book to read, and I opened a closet. Father, it was full of paintings, dozens of them, beautiful, stunning paintings she'd done in secret over the years, paintings she'd never shown anyone because she was ashamed, because I'd taught her that the thing she loved most wasn't valuable. There was one painting in particular. It was of a mother and daughter, but the mother's face was turned away and the daughter was reaching for her, but not quite touching. I stood there looking at it, and I finally understood. I'd spent her entire life turning away from who she really was, and now she couldn't show herself to anyone.
Patricia started crying when she told me this part. Deep, shaking sobs that echoed in the confessional. I gave her a moment. And then I asked about her youngest son.
My youngest, Michael. He's 43. He was always different from the other two. Sensitive, gentle, creative. When he was 12, he told me he didn't like sports. He wanted to join the school choir instead. I told him no. I said, "Boys play sports, Michael. You need to be tough." I made him join the football team. He hated every second of it. He was bullied. He was miserable. But I told him it would make him stronger. When he was 19, he brought home his first boyfriend. And Father, I said things I can never take back. I told him he was confused, that he was going through a phase. I told him I didn't raise him to be this way. He left that night, moved across the country. For 15 years we barely spoke. It took him meeting his husband, a kind man who convinced him to give me another chance, for him to even let me back into his life. But the damage was done. He's polite to me now, but he doesn't trust me. He doesn't open up to me. I'm not his mother anymore. I'm just someone he's related to. And it's my fault, because I loved him conditionally. I loved the version of him I wanted him to be, not the version he actually was.
There was a long silence after she said that. I could hear her trying to compose herself. Finally, I asked her the question I always ask. "Patricia, when did you realize what you'd done?"
6 months ago, Father. My husband died. Cancer. It was quick, and at his funeral, I watched my children. They were sad. They loved their father, but they were together. The three of them stood in a corner, talking, supporting each other, and I realized I wasn't part of that circle. They had each other, but they didn't have me. After the funeral, David pulled me aside. He said, "Mom, I know this is hard for you, but you need to understand something. Dad was the parent who loved us. You were the parent who judged us. We're here for you because it's the right thing to do, but we're not here because we want to be." Father, those words destroyed me, because he was right. I spent 30 years thinking I was being a good mother by having high standards, by pushing them to succeed, by not accepting mediocrity, but I wasn't preparing them for life. I was teaching them to hate themselves. I taught David that his best was never good enough. I taught Sarah that her passion was worthless. I taught Michael that who he was wasn't acceptable, and now they're all broken in different ways. David is a perfectionist who can't enjoy anything because nothing feels like enough. Sarah gave up on her dreams and lives a life that makes her miserable. Michael built walls so high that even the people who love him can't fully reach him. And it's my fault. I didn't beat them. I didn't abandon them. But I destroyed them with my expectations and my conditional love.
Patricia looked at me through the screen, tears streaming down her face. "Father," she said, "is it too late? Can I fix this?" And I had to be honest with her. I told Patricia the truth. Some damage can be repaired, some can't, but you can always try. I told her to write letters to each of her children, not to make excuses, not to defend herself, just to acknowledge what she'd done and apologize, to tell them she was wrong, that they were always enough, that she's sorry she couldn't see it. I don't know if it will work. I don't know if they'll forgive her, but at least she's finally telling them the truth. I'm sharing Patricia's story because I see this pattern everywhere. Parents who think love means pushing, who think acceptance means lowering standards, who think their job is to mold their children into something perfect instead of nurturing who they already are. Listen to me carefully. Your children don't need you to make them perfect. They need you to make them feel loved. Not loved if they succeed. Not loved when they meet your standards. Just loved, period. Because they exist, because they're yours. The drawing your child brings home doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be celebrated. The career your child wants doesn't need to be practical. It needs to be supported. The person your child is doesn't need to match your vision. They need to be accepted. I've sat in this booth for 50 years, and I've never, not once, heard a parent say, "I regret accepting my child for who they were." But I've heard hundreds say, "I regret not accepting them, and now it's too late." Your children are not projects to perfect. They are human beings to love. And if you can't love them as they are, you'll lose them. Not all at once, slowly, over years, until one day you'll wake up and realize you're surrounded by strangers who happen to share your DNA. Patricia knows this now, but it took her 40 years to figure it out. Don't take 40 years. If you have children, tell them today that they're enough. Tell them you love them not for what they achieve, but for who they are. Tell them before it's too late, because one day it will be. This channel exists to share these truths, these warnings, these lessons learned too late. If Patricia's story meant something to you, subscribe. Turn on notifications. There are more confessions coming, more truths that need to be heard. And if you're a parent who's made these mistakes, it's not too late to change. Start today. Love your children unconditionally before you end up in this booth 72 years old, crying over what you can't undo. The clock is ticking. What kind of parent will you be?